You're on the air. Don't say anything crazy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another podcast, and this is a much anticipated one, at least for me. There's been a lot of anticipation around how I'm going to articulate this well enough, and there's actually a good amount of angst that's been building up in being able to articulate the power and the importance of Bitcoin. Brother Bear, welcome to the podcast.
Brother Bear, I have no reservations about your ability to convey to me the power of Bitcoin and the new digital frontier. I'm also extremely excited. It's been a long time waiting for this. Let's go. Let's kick it off.
Bitcoin, boys. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. So on October 31st, 2008, a white paper was titled Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system by Satoshi Nakamoto. That was a pseudonym, an unknown identity to this day, actually, which is one of the first and most interesting sort of points of entry to Bitcoin. There's been a lot of speculation as to who it could be, including the likes of Hal Finney and Nick Szabo. And I noticed, Brother Bear, you sent me a Wikipedia link to Nick Szabo. Is he up there with your prime candidates?
Well, he's actually been recommended by some of the people I follow on the Bitcoin trail. One is Tim Ferriss, another is Naval Ravikant. Both of them have recommended that anybody interested in learning more about the inner essence of Bitcoin and smart contracts looks into Nick Szabo. So he's one I've kind of been very lightly following as a big Bitcoin thinker.
Well, I didn't know that. Did you realize that he was one of the prime candidates as the Satoshi?
No. And actually, up until the past minute, I didn't realize that the creator of Bitcoin was withheld from the public or a pseudonym. I thought that was his actual name.
Yeah. No, it's completely unknown, and there was so much speculation at the time, and there is to this day. I mean, unfortunately, Hal Finney is no longer with us, and he was a very adept programmer and computer scientist, and Hal Finney unfortunately succumbed to his illness, which was ALS. So that was a slow and gradual paralyzation of the body. And the reason Hal Finney is put forward is because he was actually the first person to receive the first Bitcoin transaction directly from Satoshi, whoever he, she, or they are.
Interesting. So there's kind of like a double relationship there going on between the two of them in the first ever form of exchange of the Bitcoin.
You're right. So if it wasn't Hal Finney, it's likely that Hal Finney knew who it was. And I know he was interviewed and asked specifically whether he was Satoshi, and he sort of shrugged it off and with a laugh that, what a preposterous suggestion. I don't know why I'm saying it in English. He was an American guy, but funnily enough, there was a guy. If you look at the directory on addresses and names and phone numbers, there was a Dorian Satoshi Nakamoto who lived but 3 miles away from Hal Finney's house in California. And what happened at one point was there was just a bunch of cameras and news networks that came around to this guy's house, believing this guy, who was part Japanese, part American, came out looking dazed and pretty disheveled, and just was marched down the road. He's like, I'm profusely denying, I'm not Satoshi.
Probably just woke up from a 10-hour nap and was like, where's the Bitcoin? Tell us.
Where is it? Where's the million Bitcoins you've got?
We demand to see it physically.
Yes. And this man is like, I'm not Satoshi. I don't know what you guys want from me. I've never heard of Bitcoin.
That's hilarious.
So this poor old elderly gentleman with a Japanese background was hounded by the media. I think that lasted all of a week, but it's still, up there with the top of the memes in terms of Bitcoin. And there's an absolute meme fest, and sort of, I feel like Bitcoin saps a lot of its energy from the memosphere.
Yes.
And anyway, if whoever Satoshi is, he, she, or they have 1 million Bitcoin. So at today's prices, that would make him, she, or they amongst the 20 richest people in the world.
So just to get this straight, Brother Bear, the creator of Bitcoin is alive and well and communicates through
No.
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 So
no. Well, we fundamentally don't know who Satoshi Nakamoto is.
But we know that they are out there somewhere and holding.
No, we don't, because it could have been Hal Finney, who's passed.
Oh, I see.
and it could be It could be you.
It could be me. Well, it is me.
Right.
I'm admitting
That's
it now.
why we got this podcast. The biggest announcement of the world is Leo Langford is Satoshi.
This is going to be like an Alex Jones is Bill Hicks moment. It's just like, what? Send round the paparazzi. Okay, so basically, we're in the dark about the creator of Bitcoin. And
We are in the dark, and I think that's inadvertently actually a strength and almost a key feature of Bitcoin, and potentially a key feature of its continued success, because it's aligned with that sort of decentralized mantra that Bitcoin prides itself on, and it almost feels like it's a gift from the gods in the sense that we don't know who it is.
yeah, I think
It's come from the ether.
financial gift from the gods. That's a good turn of phrase, Andre. And I think the fact that in its nature it is decentralized, and the status of Bitcoin is trying to be distanced from any kind of centralized person or institution. I think it works in its favor that we have no idea who the hell created it.
Yeah, this it's very unique in the sense that we don't know who created it. It was spontaneously just combusted out of thin air, and I think that definitely that narrative lends itself to the decentralization that's at the core of Bitcoin and blockchain.
Yeah, I suppose if we knew an individual who created it and they were able to indirectly and manipulate its value, whether that was through press releases or tweets or whatever, then it would cease to become as sovereign as it is today.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a coin for all and everyone, and I think the fact it has no central authority, obviously that would go against the grain if we didn't know the identity of whoever created it. So it just amazes me, the foresight of whoever they are, or he is or she is.
That's an incredible way of looking at it. And then, we're only 7 minutes into this podcast, and I am going to mention gold, in the sense that, no one created gold. It was always there, a gift from the gods, if you will. And I think that sort of maintained its status as sovereign and independent. And that's really where, the status of digital gold comes in with Bitcoin.
Absolutely. And there you mentioned that key phrase, digital gold, and that's used regularly in all sorts of discussions. So that was digital gold wasn't something that was originally articulated in terms of the use case of the Bitcoin itself. It was, in the words of Satoshi, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. So to be used as we use dollars today and sterling today, to be used in a similar sense, but be a cash for the world. But what's happened, which is interesting, and I think this is just inadvertently what it's evolved into, is that due to its scarcity and its deflationary nature, in that we are mining less and less of it every year, it's deflationary in nature due to the demand supply curve as well, but we'll get into that in a second. It's taken on more of a resemblance of gold than any cash. It's pretty illiquid. It's not moved around much. The transactions and the block sizes are pretty confined, and it's pretty old technology in terms of the blockchains we have today versus the one that was created with Bitcoin back then. I mean, the block size in terms of the number of transactions you can fit in per block has increased.
Right.
But then there was a cohort of the original Bitcoin diehards who'd stayed with the original blockchain, the original chain, as if you like, which is now called Bitcoin Cash. And Bitcoin as we know it today is actually a fork. So what they term in cryptocurrency world is hard forks. So much like you have a hard fork in the road, same thing goes here. You can either continue on the same chain. So Bitcoin Cash arguably is the original Bitcoin, and in terms of also the thesis of being a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, whereas Bitcoin, due to its almost inefficiency, has taken on this quality of a digital gold of sorts. And it's definitely more of the thesis around why you should be investing in Bitcoin than as opposed to being an efficient means of exchange. It's not an efficient means of exchange, but what it is a finite asset that is only decreasing in supply. So
Yes.
there's a limited supply of 21 million. You would have heard that number thrown around probably. 21 million units, 21 million bitcoins out there, and there will only ever be 21 million bitcoins. So it's basically economics 101 of supply and demand. So you've got, out of that 21 million, 18.6 are currently in circulation. Of that 18.6, an estimated 4 to 6 million are lost forever, and that's just because of the inefficiencies of storing cryptocurrencies, and people are throwing away old hard drives and all that sort of thing. And also, by being a decentralized network, by the very definition of decentralization, you are the custodian, you're everything. You're vertically integrated. You're both the customer, you're the custodian of that currency, you're the bank. So there's no helpline, there's no sort of customer chat you can engage with. It's you're fully responsible for your Bitcoin end to end. And so it's all too easy, and it's just, this is one of the points I'll get onto later as to why I cringe sometimes. This is one of the cringe points around Bitcoin and cryptocurrency in general. Is the storage and the governance and the custodianism of those coins. So, 18.6, 4 to 6 are lost forever, and you question what's the delta between 18.6 and the big number we all talk about, the 21 million. Well, the remaining, whatever that is in my head, 2.4 million are going to be mined over the next 120 years or so. So the last Bitcoin is due to be mined in the year 2140, and between now and then, every 4 years, or every 210,000 blocks in the blockchain, roughly every 4 years, that equates to the reward to miners mining Bitcoin will be halved every 4 years between now and the year 2140. So if it was 10 Bitcoin for these next 4 years, and the halving just happened, by the way, I think it was back in September 2020, and so the next one is due to happen in 2024. And so if the reward was 10 Bitcoin per hour back then, it's then going to be 5 after 2024.
And that's as it increases in volume and abundancy. Well, it would never be abundant, but as it increases in supply, the rewards diminish.
Right. So the supply, the remaining supply to be mined is a mere 2.4 million Bitcoin between now and the year 2140. And the amount available to miners to mine will be decreasing by half every 4 years between now and then. So there's less and less Bitcoin, and the idea is that as the price goes up, that the mining, which is already the case, is super competitive, and in the hands of probably 3 or 4 global miners, which sort of pool together to pull together their computing power and essentially win the block, solve the equation, and secure that block. So the blocks, each of the blocks in the Bitcoin blockchain is secured through the calculation and solving of very complex equations. And that's proof of work, POW. Now, proof of stake is another thing we can talk about next time, but proof of work is essentially using your hash rate and basically the speed of your processor to solve these equations. And often what miners do is pull together their collective hardware to ensure that they secure that block and then share and distribute the reward, which is however many Bitcoins, evenly between them.
That's fascinating. So,
and those mines are hugely, I mean, they're industrial operations at this stage, warehouses filled with processors and graphics cards, consuming huge amounts of electricity and churning out huge amounts of heat, which is often why they're based in very cold climates such as Greenland, the tundra in Russia, Canada even.
You see, that's fascinating. The mining of this digital gold is actually backed up by real labor, both mental and physical. And I think in my mind, that adds another layer of intrinsic value to Bitcoin beyond scarcity, beyond those kind of designators of value. There's a famous socialist, I suppose it's a Marxist economic theory, the labor theory of value, and it's comes down to one nugget of gold found in a mountain represents not just the person who mined it and found it, but the labor of the other 1,000 miners that were digging all around that perimeter.
That's precisely it, right?
And that's exactly what you've just described to me, but through the form of hardware and formula solving.
Exactly, formula solving through vast amount of an insane hash rate to try and process the hell out of these equations and solve them before the other miners do. And essentially, in that sense, it's a competition. But yes, it's that proof of work. And the proof of work in the old, mining, it would have been someone with a pickaxe getting at a rock and getting the piece of gold out. So there is an effort associated with obtaining this finite resource. And it's just a digital version of that when you're looking at the universe of Bitcoin.
That's incredible. And as a comparison to gold, I think the fascinating thing about Bitcoin is that unlike gold, it's easy to send over boundaries and international borders, right? Its authenticity is also verifiable electronically. So
that's correct.
With gold,
yes.
You don't have that immediate, you need to find a goldsmith to take a look at it and verify that for you. There's so many ways that you can be conned with fake gold, but with Bitcoin, you have those, you have the boundary advantage and you have the authenticity advantage.
Yes, absolutely. So one of there's many advantages to Bitcoin over gold, and I'm sad to say I know you're a bit of a gold bug yourself, boy.
Gold bug, prepper,
gold miner, Sprott physical gold, my boy. EDFs, go for it. GDGB,
EDFs.
buy it. But no, there is many, and I'm no stranger to gold, and I do like gold for the very basically the same reasons, or a lot of the same reasons why I love Bitcoin. But Bitcoin is superior in almost every single dimension. So one of those dimensions is the fact that blockchain, man, the technology that underlies Bitcoin, a single source of truth. Now that may not sound like a big deal, but being able to is a public ledger which tells you who owns what at any given point in time. And the use cases for that are endless and far beyond just the mere sort of global financial world. It basically it would apply and be useful for everything from ensuring democratic elections to art ownership and provenance. It's so profound. I think very few people grasp how revolutionary this is. A single source of truth. Yeah, it's called an Excel. It's an Excel that is shared amongst thousands of computers and is verified by those thousands of computers within that network, and only then is it passed and verified as the next block in that chain, or the next ledger, the next version of the Excel is agreed upon and saying like, this is our new consensus as of this time and this date. And so the ability to do that, because look, with gold, you can kind of roughly guesstimate of as to who's got what gold when, but you can't do that with an 100% degree of certainty. You can with Bitcoin.
Yeah. Again, the authenticity is verifiable immediately and electronically, right? And
yes.
It's interesting you bring that angle up, Brother Bear, because I think to the novice, Bitcoin in people's mind is a physical coin that's reflected electronically, but it actually isn't that at all. It's an entry in a ledger, and that ledger is the ultimate truth.
That's correct. So your unique address, which is a multi-character, I think it's something like over 30 characters, a mixture of integers and letters, is your unique address. Now that doesn't say Leo Langford on there, but the moment someone sort of puts the two and two together, says Leo Langford's address is this X, then that will forever follow you around. So people often make the mistake and leap to conclusions saying, Bitcoin is anonymous. No, not at all. The ledger isn't anonymous. The moment you put two and two together, you can tell who's moving what there completely transparently, because what is it? It's a public ledger. It's visible to anything and everyone.
Right.
So it does away with centralization and security and all of that. It's secure in the sense that no one can hack it. No one can forge what the ledger is. No one can forge the single source of truth as to who owns what when. No one can forge that. That is immutable. What
And that's
Yes.
that's beautiful as a concept.
It is
And-
beautiful
and
because
that-
look at the crisis of truth we're having everywhere. Look at the crisis of truth we had with the elections recently in the United States. Blockchain would
Yes.
solve that immediately, overnight.
Absolutely, absolutely. The we are in a era whereby trust and belief in truth or what even truth is at an all-time low. So I think the timing here is absolutely perfect.
Yeah, and you can almost imagine a world of where you have the relatively crude technology that blockchain is right now paired with something like AI, which would be able to almost intelligently discern what's what, and also point and I suppose leverage the technology that is blockchain in a more intelligent way to determine whether a post is being posted by the original by a Twitter account, or is this Twitter account hacked. And these issues of truth and who said what when will also be solved.
I really hope that's the case, and well, I feel like my understanding of my really financial systems is too antiquated to even envision how that would look. Because in my mind, Brother Bear, I still go down the rabbit hole of if you have a new currency, a digital gold or whatever it may be, eventually at some point that's going to be regulated by humans, and those regulators will be open to corruption, just like any other human. But as I say, that may be an antiquated view that isn't even compatible with the blockchain and how the future of digital money could look.
Yeah, I think it's drawing from your current understanding of what finance needs to look like. But I think
Exactly,
you almost
yeah.
need to look at it as with a fresh canvas. And Ray Dalio has already fallen into this pitfall by saying, Bitcoin, there's a high likelihood of Bitcoin being banned. Well, by the fact it's a decentralized blockchain, it's in quite a real sense, and I'm not trying to be sort of inflationary here or trying to big up Bitcoin too much, but it's pretty much unbannable because it doesn't know borders. It doesn't have a centralized location. It's all money for all people, as cheesy as that sounds. It really doesn't have a home. It doesn't have a domicile. It doesn't have any legal connection to anywhere.
Yes.
It's all money for all people all of the time. No one cares. Bitcoin doesn't care whether you're in India. Bitcoin doesn't care. And it really looks at the world as it should be looked at, as a single entity, a planet.
Global
for
entity,
God's sake.
one world.
When you look at the planet from the International Space Station, do you see borders? How stupid and meaningless do borders start to look when you look at it from the 30,000 foot view, the 100,000 foot view, from the moon? When you stand on the surface of the moon and you can cover the Earth and everything that's ever happened on that planet with your thumb.
Yeah.
Do you realize how obvious and necessary something like an internet currency? We have the internet, a global telephone. We take it for granted that we know everything anywhere. That was the information age, and now the means of exchange on a similar kind of network needs to happen, and the first instantiation of that is Bitcoin.
Absolutely, and of course the internet has its own currency. Someone likened the internet, using an antiquated rate of exchange or just fiat currencies as like email still using the US Postal Service. It's, of course, the internet and the information revolution was going to carry a digital currency with it. But I think what's so liberating about it is exactly what you've just said. It knows no borders. It has no allegiance to any government.
No.
And central banks hate that, because they are driven by a political agenda or an economic agenda.
And I was talking to Damien earlier on about this, and the more I look at it, the more I sort of realize this is an unstoppable freight train. It's an unstoppable freight train, literally. Like nothing I can conceive of can get ahead of this curve because it's already so far ahead. They could have probably killed it very early on, back into sort of 2009, 10, 11, 12, probably even. But it's gone too far. It's on this natural adoption curve. It's become $1 trillion network in the span of 12 years, which is a record for any network. There's only 5 other networks that have done that, and I'll talk to that in a bit. But it's done something quite extraordinary. It's an unstoppable freight train, and you look at countries that have tried to or have banned it, and actually it's had no effect. No, do you know what? I'm wrong. It has had an effect on the transaction rate. It's gone up
Wow.
because it's impossible to stop, Leo.
Yeah, of course.
Like
Yeah,
it
I mean,
is.
it sounds like it's so global in its nature that it is virtually unbannable unless sort of, a country was to go down the North Korea route.
Right.
I feel like, and in terms of movement towards its critical mass as a medium of everyday exchange, I feel like your metaphor that the freight train is moving ever faster. The U.S. printed $6 trillion to fight the coronavirus, printed out of thin air, and even though some have argued that Bitcoin failed the crisis test, and they argued that because it didn't skyrocket, like in usual terms, it didn't skyrocket, but it also remained very stable. So I'd say in some sort of instances, it did actually very much pass the crisis test, and that just gives it more power as something that's more or less unbannable.
Not sure who could say it's not skyrocketed. I mean, this over the last year it's gone up 400%. That's mean, since its lows in March, it's gone up 1,000%. Show me an asset with the size of, in terms of market capitalization of Bitcoin, that's done that. Nothing comes close.
Yeah, nothing does it?
And you look at fiat currencies, right? And by fiat currencies, we mean the standard currencies we know and love and loathe. The dollar, the sterling, the euro. Yep. The debasing of those. If we look at the dollar as the case study, the debasing of the dollar off the gold standard in the 70s by Nixon. And do you remember the banning of ownership of gold that did happen, where you were forced to trade in gold for a set price set by the government itself? That movement, that move doomed the dollar to fail and fall to zero sooner or later. That's going to happen. We know that. Every currency, every fiat currency ever created in history has failed and gone to zero. So people often reference Bitcoin as a religion. Well, if you look at any fiat currency that's been debased from an asset of limited supply, in this case gold, then it becomes a purely faith-based religion overnight.
Yes.
A religion, in the case of centralized fiat currency such as the dollar, a religion at the mercy of the whims of sort of the central banking authority, right? So the Fed. So they would dictate things like inflation, quantitative easing, and printing of additional monetary supply. Now, Bitcoin doesn't have that. We know the price. We know how much Bitcoin is going to be created. It's deflationary in nature, in fact, because the demand is only going up and the supply is decreasing over time, and in fact will come to a dead halt in 2140. And to your point, Leo, around the amount of the dollar money supply being just absolutely going through the roof, it has had multiplied by 3 since the pandemic, since March. So we went from an expanding dollar money supply at an average of 7% a year to 24% last year. And we're looking at an increasing circulating dollar supply, increasing by an average about 15% over the next 4 to 8 years. And then you look at the stock market, you're like, how the hell is this thing still going up? Because there's no real fundamental reasons for this to be skyrocketing as it is. And then the penny drops when you divide the S&P 500 by the rate of increasing dollars. And guess what happens when you do that? It's completely and utterly flat.
Really?
Because the money has to go somewhere, and it pools into the stock market. And so it's a engineered fake pseudo rise. It doesn't exist. It's a mirage.
It's false investment information. It's a complete falsehood, really, that value is there. I never thought about that, because
a company's value is denominated in dollars. Its value is denominated in dollars. Its market capitalization, its market cap, its total value is denominated in dollars. Those underlying dollars it's being denominated in are falling in value. So for every dollar you can buy that much less. So it's the price increase is ever diluted. Like it really isn't worth $100 more.
That's incredible, and I hadn't thought about that. I remember back in October taking a look at the different metrics, different indexes and looking at the level of growth and thinking that's very odd, but dividing it by that growth in dollar printing explains it perfectly. Really, that it's absolutely flat. It's a mirage.
Yeah, and it makes sense, doesn't it? When
Of
you
course,
think
it makes
about it
sense.
like that.
Well, yeah, because we're seeing insane supply side and government enforced halts to growth, whether that's the travel industry or you're looking at oil and gas or whatever. So that makes perfect sense. Really, it's an absolute mirage that's basically enforced to stop the bubble from bursting.
Yeah, there is a sense that I get. There's almost a perfect confluence of almost variables at this point in terms of Bitcoin's run up. So if we just look at the price, because people often fixate on Bitcoin's price, rightly so, and that can be a point of entry, but I always find the underlying technology so interesting and almost so much more profound on a philosophical level as to what it could become. But yes, I mean, we can all get on this train and enjoy the dividends that do come. So it's the price of Bitcoin has been quite something out of this world. It's been growing at an average of 200% a year for a decade since its inception in 2008 until March 2020, since when it's actually increased at 400% a year since March 2020. So a brief history kind of some of the bull runs. So the bull runs would be market rallies that you've seen in Bitcoin. The first one was in 2013. Then that rose to about 1,000, just over, and then 2017 it rose to 20,000, a high of 20,000, and those two rallies were very much characterized in terms of participants by retail traders. So average Joes, you and I, participating and buying Bitcoin, and very much in a speculative manner. Now 2021 is different. The reason being is that institutions are really getting involved this time, and by institutions, one of the pioneers in that space was the company MicroStrategy, headed up by CEO Michael Saylor, and he's been one of the pioneers and advocates and evangelists of Bitcoin. And you know what? I do feel like sometimes the term of religion is apt for Bitcoin, because and we understand that, yes, we don't shy away from it being a religion, and actually it's a better and more efficient means of exchange, and a way out of the ever inflationary fiat currencies. So it's actually I think a benefit for all to at least invest some of their net worth in Bitcoin and mitigate the impact of inflation in their normal currency, whether that's dollar, whether that's yen, whatever.
Yes.
And so 2021's been unique in the sense that it's got real institutional interest and backing and real investment and real money put into it. And you looked at who followed suit after MicroStrategy put a number of billions in. Tesla. And Tesla is now in fact selling, is willing to sell their product for Bitcoin, which has been a real landmark event.
That's a huge development. And there's actually been cases of a number of companies, a number of business owners actually just selling parts of their company for Bitcoin, not for fiat currencies, but for Bitcoin only.
Well, changing their cash position, because in the case of MicroStrategy, they had a lot of loose cash just sitting there. And I mean, most healthy companies do have a cash position just sitting there. And they'll either use that cash to reinvest into the business, let it sit there on their balance sheet, which always looks good to shareholders, or buy back shares. But Michael Saylor was sort of the genius he had was to convert that cash position from fiat into Bitcoin, and in doing so has made an incredible return. But it's having an incredible new asset on your balance sheet, and a lot of companies are following suit and realizing the benefits of holding something like Bitcoin on their balance sheets as not an inflationary thing that loses value every year at 2% on average. Well, it's going to be more now that we're creating so much more supply.
Yeah.
But creating something that's deflationary in nature and is likely to only go up. And it's almost a no-brainer then.
I think it's incredible how much value this will add to it once, wealthy people and institutional investors have that buy-in. I mean, it's already happening now. But it's just so interesting seeing the trajectory from, something that was almost seen as like a choice of the rogues, the financial rogues, or people involved in the black market or trading
Yes.
on Silk Road or something, something bad and nefarious like that. And now we're at a state where we're seeing institutional investors getting that buy-in, and
Right.
that's going to change the whole game.
It's going to change the whole game because we're talking big money. And, I don't know whether it's going to be this cycle or the next cycle. Because if you notice, look at the years, Leo, 2013, 2017, 2021. They've all got 4 years between them. And the reason for that is they coincide with the halving. The halving is the event I mentioned earlier on in the podcast, which is where the reward, the supply, that the reward to each miner, whoever wins the block, is halved. So, where between 2008 or 2009, 2013, it was 20 Bitcoin between 2013 and 2017. It then became 10 Bitcoin per block in terms of the reward given to the miners to incentivize mining and verify the block. And so that in turn coincides with a rally. And it makes sense. And there's a number of charts that try and plot this change, and one of the ones that's been particularly successful in terms of historically plotting the price and retrospectively plotting the price of Bitcoin has been Metcalfe's law, and it's this network effect that essentially forecasts the adoption curves of a network of the likes of something like Facebook, but it maps incredibly accurately to something like Bitcoin because in and of itself is also a network, albeit a monetary one.
Yes, yeah. So it extrapolates that observation of how a network like Facebook or Instagram would work, and maps it out onto how this currency is going to behave.
Correct, and these bull runs we've seen every 4 years are catalyzed by this halving, where the supply, you get this supply shock, where it suddenly decreased by half overnight after the 210,000 blocks, and that tends to be the catalyst historically for these bull runs, which have happened very periodically, and we're likely only to see future ones every 4 years.
Yeah.
And it's not out. I mean, let's talk price targets. Let's do it. Have a bit of fun. So, there's been a lot of. I mean, 100,000, 100K Bitcoin in dollar terms, is very much seen as a conservative estimate for this bull run. So that's very much on the lower end of the spectrum. Up to some people forecasting, including I think there was some JP Morgan report that was looking at 400K, and then there's really estimates way out there at 500K, sort of by the end of this year, for a single Bitcoin.
That's incredible.
$500,000.
$500,000 for one Bitcoin. Yeah, I think I read that the price, comparing apples to apples, if you were to buy $100 worth of Bitcoin in 2009, the value you would have now was something like $18 million.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all.
and it's just going up, right? But my question to you is when do you think we're going to see some some different trends there? Because obviously Bitcoin in its nature is very speculative, and a lot
it's very speculative. Yeah. So I think we're definitely going to see a correction. I mean, it's a bubble, right? It's a bubble in the sense that the price is going to be grossly inflated. Now, inflated relative to what? Because it's kind of in its own
atmosphere,
its own atmosphere, its own world, its own universe, rather. So it might get expensive in inverted commas, but if you look at historically, the bull runs have lasted on average 10 months. So that, and really the broader bull cycle lasts 2 years. So really, people might be looking at selling some, or at least to sell some with the view to then buy some when it bottoms out. In August this year, on sort of September, August time, and obviously none of this is financial advice, but
this is just two friends talking.
Exactly. So that's a month I've got on my mind in terms of offloading some, not all, probably 50%, and then with the view to then hold on to that money and then buy in when it falls a bit, because it inevitably will. It's just a question of how far. And I say inevitably quite tentatively because it might not, right? Who knows? It could just carry on skyrocketing to 15 million per Bitcoin, which is sort of maybe the next marker in the cycle that will come in 2025, in 4 years' time. Sorry, 2025, yes.
It's so interesting tracking the value of it, but also the philosophical side is, I'd say even more interesting, as you said before. It is. I actually wanted to run by a few risks associated with Bitcoin that you could perhaps correct my reservations on them.
Well, I will say, as much as I'm an advocate of Bitcoin, I must put my hands up and say it's not without its problems.
Of course, and like anything, there's going to be some pitfalls, especially when you're looking at a store of value that's speculative by nature. But there were 3 risks, actually, Brother Bear, that were highlighted by Naval Ravikant, and they really struck true with me. And he wasn't criticizing Bitcoin or blockchain. In fact, he's a massive evangelist advocate. He loves it. Thinks it's one of the best inventions.
Yeah, we're both fans of Naval, aren't we? And I think he once, when he first looked into blockchain and Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies generally, he describes it as a mind virus that lasted 2 years.
Wow, that's a very cutting criticism. I didn't know he'd said that.
No, in a good way. A mind virus in that it just occupied every waking conscious second of his existence. He was so engrossed in the technology,
right.
In a good sense, that he was just completely absorbed by it.
Yes, yeah, it's interesting that. So yeah, from his perspective, he's very much bought into it, but instead of being kind of blinded by the beautiful light of Bitcoin. There are a number of risks, 3 major risks he highlights in his no free lunch tweet. And the no free lunch tweet is really just looking at risks. So the first one is fraud risk. And again, Brother Bear, I'd love for you to comment on these 3 risks and talk about how perhaps the technology may overcome these in the long term. But fraud risk is, as you'd expect, the fact that it's not backed by the dollar. You're basically replacing the banking system, all the guns and the police that uphold that system are now being decentralized to the individual. You are the custodian, and you do have fraud risks that's carried by companies like Tether. They've been criticized for saying that they back it by physical dollars, but in fact some people suspect that they don't. Obviously, I don't think there's any evidence for that at all. I don't think there's any at all, but that's just one example. The second Naval highlights, Brother Bear, is censorship risk. And the censorship risk, as I understood it, is just coming down to government influencing really certain companies. Coinbase was one that was listed to turn off your account if say the government doesn't like a certain character. And that would be my main concern when it comes to our conversation before about it being unbannable. And then the third, which goes without saying, is actually blow up risk, and that's the value all going to zero, or in some kind of hypothetical system change scenario, will the internet even exist? But that's kind of getting into the kind of prepper scenario. But blow up, censorship, and fraud were the 3 main risks. I would like to pick your brains on how you think the technology could overcome some of those, Brother Bear.
With most astute reservations, or at least questions posed to the Bitcoin. Let me address your last one first.
Okay.
So your point around, or Naval's point around...
Blow up!
Blow up! Black
Boom!
Swan event.
Collateral. Black Swan.
Wait a minute. So, something like a Black Swan event, conceivably, let's, put some meat in the bone. Well, imagine the internet goes down for a prolonged period of time. Now, that would be almost because you can't, again, the internet isn't centralized. So you'd have to imagine it'd be something like a solar flare that would knock everything out.
Yes.
So yes, that could be a problem, because you wouldn't be able to transact. However, when everything did come back online, eventually, sooner or later, inevitably would, um, your cryptos would still be safe in your respective wallets.
Mm.
So that doesn't change so much. Although I suppose if Bitcoin were to become more of a cash system as opposed to what it is now, which is more of a sort of illiquid gold asset that you sort of buy and hold. If that dynamic were to change and it actually were to move to more of a cash dynamic, then yes, that could become a problem, because I'd imagine want to be using and buying and selling that currency more readily. So yes, the point taken, but I see it as remaining the base layer of this new digital ecosystem of cryptocurrencies, of global currencies. How brilliant would it be to go on holiday and you don't have to exchange anything? You can just buy anything from anywhere and go anywhere with anyone and buy it with one currency, or have at least one currency that underlies them all. The gold standard, the new gold standard that occupies the digital realm, the virtual reality that we're moving to, the digital reality.
That wouldn't have the pitfalls of the euro, because one of the major issues to value storing in the euro is that it lost its value and printing became very much commonplace and the norm, because you couldn't compare value of it to other European nations. Sort of the relativity of currencies between, say, the French franc and the Italian lira kept a leash, but as there's scarcity, that would eradicate that problem.
Yes, absolutely. And this is how I will address your other points. Sorry, your train of thought is taking me on a beautiful tangent, I think. And in that, I think Bitcoin has and will forever occupy now a very special place in this new digital monetary system, in that it has become the reserve currency. It has become the dollar. It's become the gold of this new digital world. It is a new world, and it is a universe that will be the future. I don't see it as being any other way. And it's occupied this very privileged position of being the foundation upon which everything else is built and benchmarked against. Okay, so all value is benchmarked against the Bitcoin. Everything is denominated in Bitcoin terms, much like we do with the yen dollar, sterling dollar, euro dollar, dollar. Okay, so the Bretton Woods set a new precedent in motion, which is that the dollar is the new reserve currency. I think that established way of the world is about to change, and the dollar was created in a time before the internet. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
A time before the bloody internet, which is basically running everything. How is it not the obvious outcome that a currency of the internet becomes the dominant one? Of course it will.
Of course. It's almost, when you put it like that, it's inevitable. Of course the internet has its own currency. Of course.
The dollar is archaic, no offense.
Of course it is. And you have individuals like Janet Yellen, who you would think would have all the macroeconomic insight in the world.
But she's not a technologist, and that's who runs the world now.
Well, absolutely. And this is why the overregulated casino of Wall Street is being replaced by decentralized finance.
Welcome to the new world. Welcome to the technocracy.
Absolutely, and interesting. You mentioned that she isn't a technologist, because she argued, I think it was just over a month ago, right at the end of February, that Bitcoin was incredibly inefficient and undesirable.
But she's missing the point. You see, and you get this as well, that although initially envisioned as a peer-to-peer to cash system, it's, for better for worse, actually turned into something potentially a lot more valuable, which is the base layer of the digital ecosystem, and pitching and benchmarking all value going forward as the new gold standard. It is the new gold standard in this digital world.
Absolutely, because the digital world is where the next frontier will come from. If you kind of compare it to the colonialism of the old world,
Yes.
someone commented, now the Wild West is tamed, that these are the new frontiers, digital gold, essentially. So it makes perfect sense that this is the new frontier replacing an antiquated system. Look, I mean, there's been so many revisions of the current system anyway. I mean, getting rid of gold and moving to a Bretton Woods system or a globally pegged dollar, that was a huge change. At one point the sterling used to be the gold standard. So
that's absolutely right, Leo. So you understand sort of the relative primacy of currencies before the dollar as well, and then I think it was the Dutch, whatever the hell theirs was, when they had the Dutch Empire.
yeah, and I'm not sure what that was, but this is just kind of a testimony to how there are major revisions as empires form and crumble, in monetary exchange.
Right. And this is why Dalio says cash is trash, because man, like we're due an extinction basically. The average lifespan of a fiat currency is about 95 years, and we're hitting it with the dollar.
We've presumably exceeded that.
We have actually,
yeah, and the digital replacement is far more forward thinking, in the sense that it isn't tied to someone with a political agenda as we know it. I think Ron Paul for many years talked about nationalizing money, and when you think nationalizing money, you think in your mind, oh, is he talking about some kind of socialist idea? But quite the contrary, he was talking about using gold in his time to put value and control over the money supply right in the hands, peacefully, of the American public. This has gone a step further because it's done that on a global level.
Yes. And
or it will do that on a global level if successful.
It will do that on a global level, correct. And people often are maybe misguided by thinking, oh, I can't afford a Bitcoin, it sounds very expensive now. I'll let you into a little secret, Leo, that
tell me.
A Bitcoin, much like a pound is broken down into pence, a Bitcoin is broken down into something called Satoshis. And a single Bitcoin is made up of 100 million Satoshis. So it's divisible down to 100 million units. And so, divide $60,000, which is the current price today, divide that by 100 million. That's how divisible Bitcoin can get. And I almost fantasize or wonder, like, whether is there going to be a world one day where you are paying 2 Satoshis for a hot dog, and in relative dollar terms, a Bitcoin is about $100 million. And I think we might, dare I say, I'll stick my neck out and say that we might see that world in our lifetimes.
I would love to see that world in our lifetimes. I think that's...
You're gonna get. You better get some then.
I need to get some quick. I need to stop douching around with gold and buy some bloody Bitcoin, don't I?
Well, I think sort of a gold's another good one, because it is a real it's a commodity asset. It isn't subject to the same sort of just whimsical printing and creation of additional supply as you are subject to in the fiat world. Gold is a beautiful thing, and I mean, if you even look at minerals, particularly ones of intrinsic value that have a confluence of two things. They are intrinsic value like silver, but it also has broad industrial applications such as silver in terms of solar panels and elsewhere. So that confluence is a nice one.
This brings me to my next reservation, and I love the way you've just put that about Bitcoin, and I would be so happy and excited about the thought of a world whereby we were no longer paying with dollars or pounds or whatever it may be. We were paying with Satoshis for our hot dogs.
But just everywhere in the world. I mean,
everywhere, yes.
An exchange rate for already, like, I think the human mind has an incredible capacity to adapt, and I can already imagine a world very quickly where we are all working off the same ledger. We are all working off Bitcoin, but probably a different currency. But Bitcoin is ultimately the underlying gold that everything is benchmarked against. Anyway, there will be no need to, it's so antiquated to change euros for dollars and dollars for pounds. It's mad. It is mad.
It is mad. When you think of...
And to think, Leo, you can send $1 billion. You know how hard that would be using normal currency on a
Yeah.
bank transfer. Do you know how many weeks that would take of approvals and things? I can do
Right.
that with you instantly for the price of a hot dog.
Yes. Yeah, no, I believe it. I believe it. I can't imagine it, but I 100% believe it. Um, and I think that when it comes to commodities like gold, just backing up a second to that because that's been something that's mentioned. My my knowledge of Bitcoin says to me that there are major advantages over gold. We've talked about boundaries, borders, authenticity, verifiable instantaneously. My only worry would be intrinsic value, and that's always been my reservation about Bitcoin. Is that unlike gold, which is used in jewelry, aerospace, um, semiconductors, fill in the blank. Bitcoin in and of itself is not intrinsically valuable. Um, Now, the only way I feel like this could be, what you could come back and say to me to this is belief. And I know there are some amazing diehard maximalists that really believe hard in Bitcoin. Some of them have an awful lot of money, institutional investors and whatnot. Um, you know, that is where I see the value coming from. That's where I see the value coming from because at the end of the day, what has kept the dollar afloat for so many decades? Belief. It is a religion with the central bankers as the priesthood. The big difference is this is now a decentralized, finite belief system. But so saying that, Brother Bear, would you be able to alleviate some of my concerns about the fact that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value?
I'll tell you this. So there's a shiny yellow-looking metal. What is the common denominator between that and a shiny Charizard and the rarest Yu-Gi-Oh cards out there and emeralds and rubies? What's the underlying common denominator between all of those? What is it? There's one word.
Luster?
Scarcity. Scarcity, 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 scarcity.
Yeah.
What Bitcoin has is scarcity, and it has the cutting edge, the best technology we've ever created as a human species of verifying that scarcity. Diamonds aren't actually scarce. They're only scarce through a limited controlled supply through cartels, essentially. Now, Bitcoin is digitally via the best irrefutable, immutable technology we've created so far, known as the blockchain, to verify that there is this many Bitcoin and there will be never any more. Now, scarcity is the name of the game. It's the reason why the things that are valuable, and there's never been a better technology to back that up than blockchain. And Bitcoin is the first one to do that. It's been through a natural adoption trajectory over the last 12 years, and it's got a unique space in that new digital world, the new digital economy. How's that?
I think that's a very nice, a pure answer, and 100% I agree with it. The scarcity is where the value is derived. I guess this is just kind of a mental roadblock that I'm trying to overcome because there are many examples of objects that are very beautiful and very scarce yet worthless in the use. Whereas you're looking at gold and its ability to not tarnish and its malleability and use for so many different applications in from computer hardware to wedding rings. Just getting down to physical, tangible brass tacks. That's really my only reservation about Bitcoin. I love the concept. I love the technology, which I don't understand about it, and I think that it's a beautiful libertarian concept. But that's my only hold up is intrinsic value.
I think because Leo, you're on the cusp. I feel it, but
I'm on the Ray Dalio cusp.
I can feel it. No, but seriously, it is that leap, and it is a leap between the analog, tangible, physical world and a non-physical digital realm. So there is a reason that certain things, say on these cutting edge, high adoption games like World of Warcraft, there's certain things that are very valuable because they're scarce. There's only 3 types of this sword, and therefore, they're very rare.
Yes.
And I think it's making that leap and almost detaching yourself from the real world for a second and realizing that there's a bigger, more global world. Because look, I can't speak to a person in India without the internet,
Right.
unless I go there on a plane. Now, that just give you I can do that instantly over Skype. Now that just I'm trying to pull a tenuous analogy here of the power of digital and the immediacy of digital,
Yeah.
and the true global nature of digital in all its forms: communication,
So in a way,
information.
let me stop you there because I feel like I'm getting closer to my eureka moment. You're saying kind of the value of Bitcoin doesn't just represent the currency, but it represents the ingenuity behind the internet as a revolution and system of communication, exchange, and whatever.
It's the TAM, bro. It's the TAM, total addressable market. Everybody. It's 9 billion freaking people probably by the time we talk at this time at midnight over here in the UK. But yes, it's everyone. It's a technology that is accessible and everyone, and I mean that. And it's rare that someone could tap into a currency and benefit financially off the back of it so easily. It's also security-wise immutable. It's also completely limited in its supply. It's also the genius that Satoshi built into this, that its supply is halving every 4 years until the year 2140.
Yes.
Look, it's got a pretty boring purpose, which is to essentially be digital gold. But that is such, albeit a boring, it's a massively important role to be playing in the new digital financial landscape. And it's essential. It's the base layer. It is the concrete foundation upon which this castle will be built.
Absolutely, because it overcomes many of the shortcomings of gold whilst fulfilling all the positives and benefits.
And Leo, like gold doesn't fulfill it in the digital space at all.
Right.
Like gold doesn't exist in the digital realm at all. It doesn't register on the digital graph. It doesn't exist, really. If we're saying the digital realm is actually starting to supersede the real realm, I know where I want to be.
I mean, that's a fantastic point. That's a fantastic point. The question is it though? That's, I suppose,
It's inevitable.
yeah. I mean,
Because
supersede.
it's look at what we're using now, Leo.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's just superseding in what sense, right? Because at the end of the day, I feel like there may be parity between the two, because you're still going to need, okay, we may be using the software and all the gumption of the internet to have this conversation, but look at the amount of gold that's packed in the semiconductors within our devices. The movement towards perhaps parity I can see as more realistic. Admittedly,
ultimately the market will decide, but
it will.
We're moving to a world, a digital world. We are in a digital world, predominantly digital world. That tide of the digital world being ever more important in the real, tangible, real realm. Not that that's not important. It will forever be important, and being in touch with it is very important for everyone's equilibrium. But it's becoming ever more important, and I don't think gold has a space in that world, not to the same extent it's enjoyed for the past thousands of years. Now, granted, Bitcoin's only had 12 years of history, but what a history it's been. And
Absolutely.
the natural adoption curve, I mean, we're still in price exploration here, man. We're in 12 years into the technology that will underlie the future of our great grandchildren. I believe that. I believe we're looking at something that will be benchmarking the value of everything in digital and physical real realms goods. I believe everything will be benchmarked off the back of Bitcoin. It's the new base layer. It's the new gold standard. It's the new reserve currency globally. But I hope I'm answering your question, or at least sort of getting there.
I
in
think
that
it's a case of
in
me. Sorry, carry on. I cut you off.
yeah, no, no. I think we're getting there. I think what I'm trying to explain is that the gold was never designed for the digital realm. It's not very divisible.
No,
You don't know what gold you own. Also, it's held in vaults by God knows who, by God knows what. Whether that's a third party or not, does it even exist? You can't prove it to me now. You'd probably have to go to the vault tomorrow when it's open. Oh, sorry, we're open only 5 days a week. That kind of crap just shouldn't exist anymore. We're so beyond this.
yeah. These are all really good points. Gold has so many practical shortcomings, right? When it comes to the divisibility, but also I think there's just a general ignorance about how much gold there is. But also not just in terms of.
You can't tell me who owns what when, or
Well,
how
no,
much
but
you can't prove to me, or no one can.
future mining as well. I mean, we can say, well, we could mine a bunch of gold in Alaska in 50 years' time. Well, what's that going to do to the price and
Correct.
but whereas you're saying, there's an absolute cap, there's a fixed amount, and I think that, in a sense, makes it much more exciting than gold.
Yeah, and
You know,
it's very linearly predictable, Leo, as to how much Bitcoin will be mined over between now and the next halving in 2025, and then how much Bitcoin is allowed to be mined or won per hour for those who win that puzzle and earn the Bitcoin in terms of miners. So you can accurately plot how much Bitcoin will be added to the supply between what we have now in terms of circulating supply, if you recall, was 18.6 million.
Yeah.
And then between now and the 21 million golden number, which we'll reach in the year 2140. And Satoshi, again, whoever he, she, or they are, genius.
absolutely, yeah. My question, I have a question for you as well, regarding, as we're on the scarcity topic here. And again, I totally love the concept and status of Bitcoin. I'm stress testing you here, Andre, because I'm trying to get buy-in myself on it. And I'm trying to understand it better. But this is another aspect of my own reservation. It's just about the scarcity. The focus on Bitcoin, along with many other cryptos, has been on ensuring scarcity, that no one can easily generate new coins, and that has many benefits. But what my concern is, and this comes from a macroeconomic point of view, is that can neglect stability of value, and that can also neglect ease of use. So going back to the sort of hot dog stand analogy, if for perhaps a foreseeable future, perhaps the next 50 years, the value is so sharply increasing and declining, will it ever have, in that time period, will it have an ease of use? Or do we have to wait until, was it the year 2140 to get that ease of trade? Because right now, from what I can see, the real value is all fueled by speculation. I would just question that as sustainable for mass public use.
That's a great question. I think it is, when you look at the use case as a more of a gold than a peer-to-peer cash system. Now, it could become a peer-to-peer cash system once we've increased the block size sufficiently. And what I mean by that is block size sufficient where you can accommodate for that many more thousands of transactions per second, which would inevitably be part of the need. Now, back to your question. Volatility is being evened out, and Bitcoin will become ever less and less volatile as time goes on. So like I said, we're in price discovery mode at the minute. We've only been to this game for 12 years, so we're very young. This is still early, don't worry.
Yeah.
We're very much, yes, we are the infants. We've just been born. And I saw a really interesting tweet today. Not that Twitter should ever be sort of a source of deep knowledge, but someone said Bitcoin's only 0.058 of a million. Do you know how cheap that is? and
Yeah.
not to kind of sensationalize it, but I believe someone 100 years from now will sort of look at that tweet and think, yeah, God, they were right, because the volatility is being, I suppose, almost evened out. The peaks and the troughs are going to become ever more or ever less drastic as we complete this price discovery phase, which will probably last for the next few halvings at least, until we get really past the institutions, because you know what comes after the institutions, right? That will be then state, right? So that'll be central banks getting involved, China, and do you know what? There could well be a competition of the Fed versus the Chinese central banking governance, whatever the hell that is.
Yeah.
And the euro trying to get involved, and every other big power in terms of the G8 countries trying to get their hands of what little Bitcoin is left. And you can almost have a disproportionate advantage in this world by, suppose, in the best case, getting involved now, because there is a sense that there's the writings on the wall. It's unbannable. So there's a certain inevitability about it, and there's this sort of a quote that everyone uses on Twitter about this is like, in retrospect, it was inevitable.
Yeah. I think it'd be such a hilarious turn of events if central banks started vying for Bitcoin.
Imagine if that becomes the only option to save their own currency.
Yeah.
Or the dying attempts that obviously won't work to save their currency.
It's not that beyond the pale, though.
It's not, because, man, they're spending like there's no tomorrow, and it's not funny.
It's really not.
It's not funny. Like, you think you can kick the can up the road, yes, but there's a delayed fuse on this bastard, and it's going to blow. And, you can't just expect to print trillions of dollars and expect no consequences. That's insanity.
There was
I'm worried about like a Weimar Republic level of inflation. Seriously.
Well, this is the thing. There was a tweet I heard about, and it was, again, not a deep source of knowledge here, but one that made me chuckle. What would happen if the Earth was, invaded by very aggressive aliens? The answer is the Fed would just print more money.
The printing machine goes brrr.
Yeah, it just compounds. And but on a very serious note, it's highway robbery, because people have saved, put into pension plans and savings accounts, stock shares, traditional instruments for decades, and suddenly all that's being wiped away over a matter of months.
Eroded rapidly. It's horrible.
Rapidly debased and eroded. I mean, I don't think many people were in the dark about the fact that it gets eroded over a lifetime, and you have to try different hacks to.
But everyone's used to 2% a year, which is not small. But now it's going to be. I mean, we're going to take double digits very soon.
Yeah, and I think that sort of Weimar Republic, Zimbabwean, hyperinflation outcome is becoming more and more of a realistic outcome. And God, that if anything there's nothing that incentivizes people more to invest in crypto than that.
Yeah, and Bitcoin, man, because like there's crypto out there, and there's a lot of rubbish coins out there that are just out to sort of scam you, but Bitcoin's been through this natural adoption curve, and it's taken up a very special placeholder in this new digital economy. And someone I look up to and read into, a guy called Raoul Pal on YouTube. You should look it up. He's got a channel called Real Vision. Okay. He has some fantastic interviews with some very insightful people, including Michael Saylor, who I mentioned earlier, and other people and detractors from Bitcoin as well, which say look at the full picture. Yeah. And he talks about Bitcoin as a life raft. A life raft from the inevitable the coming demise of fiat currencies the world over, because it is. I don't literally every day I'm struggling to see a picture where that isn't the case, where Bitcoin doesn't become this life raft, and if you're not on it, God help you.
Well, I think that's a good point, and the life raft is a great analogy. The burning island that we're on is, the fire starters are the central banks,
And in
and
some sense, I hope I'm wrong, Leo.
well, of course, because change is hard, especially on such a astronomical level. When you look at your wages every month, and your company deposits pounds or dollars into, in my sense, dollars, in your case, pounds, into your account, and you're suddenly thinking, but hold on, are these kind of just monopoly tokens?
Well,
Is
they
my
can print
labor
as much as they like. They really can.
right? And then you start to think even deeper about your labor, and is your labor actually at a complete mismatch with the currency that's put into your account? Not that that's any fault of your company, that's the system they live in. But if anything, that speaks to me as more and more time for a complete system change.
I've had the mirror image of that thought.
Mm.
So exactly the same. And it's always like, and almost the sense, not that I'm ungrateful, but is the sense that, is that all really? Because I've worked pretty hard for this month, and that feels underpaid a little bit. When I consider it against, in the context of an inflationary currency.
Yeah.
And you look at wages versus inflation, not that they've ever kept up, but particularly over the last 20, 30 years, they've stagnated versus inflation. Inflation has done its regular 2% on average a year march. Wages have stayed where they are. Why?
Yes. Yeah. Because when I think, remembering back to sort of the early 2000s, my parents always told me, you get pay rises every few years in line with inflation, because that's just the way the world works. A house is going to cost a lot more in 10 years than it does now, as is, a tub of ice cream or whatever. So why is that not happening anymore?
I think it's companies are looking at diminishing returns, and I think they're trying to protect themselves, so they can't literally afford to pay you more. I think that's the sad reality, and I think as much as we're subject to inflation, they are too. They're not immune to inflation, and so kind of it trickles down, right?
They are agents just as we are.
Correct,
in the
because they're
economic
subject to the same denominator, sterling, the dollar, whatever the hell, take your pick. But it's time to leave. It doesn't make sense. It's a failing system. No currency, no fiat currency on this planet is connected to any asset of a limited supply. We used to be on a gold standard, but we've left that a long time ago. So
absolutely, and that there are examples of better managed currencies, Singaporean dollar, Swiss franc, but none of them have come anywhere near close to, at least even simulating that level of scarcity that creates true value, or true value derived from public belief.
Yeah, exactly. And Brother Bear, cycling back to the reservations that were sort of initially articulated by Naval. What was the other two? The first two I didn't really address properly.
So Naval, you addressed blow up risk very well, and I think I've got that down. Naval also mentioned censorship risk, and fraud risk. I honestly, fraud risk, that's not a big one, because I feel like that's kind of like I suppose you could come at it with the custodian angle, but when Naval was talking about fraud risk, he was talking about companies like Tether saying they were backed by dollars, when in essence they weren't. But in a way, that's kind of a moot point, because why would you want your cryptocurrency backed by dollars? Censorship risk was the main focus, and this comes back to is it bannable question,
right? So I think I'm just going to echo a little bit what I said earlier around my perceived unbannability of cryptocurrency, just by virtue of it being decentralized. You can't put a gun or a knife at it. It's like trying to kill the air around you. You can't, because it's everywhere. It's omnipresent, and it's with everyone, and it's with no single killable node. the nodes are everywhere. They're like the molecules of oxygen around you. So you can swipe and curse at it all you want. Nothing's going to happen. And I think kind of testament to that is what you saw. Good God, I just wish I remember the country where it showed a graph of the day it was banned and then the transactions and buying of the currency going through the roof for the next weeks.
That's just hilarious. Yeah.
Because it's impossible. It just is. And you know what? Even if they do attach your name to a particular wallet, we'll get to the point of where everyone has like 10 wallets. And once the moment they find out who you are against that wallet, you'll just move it to the other address. And that's it.
I guess we'd have to be talking about a very tyrannical, violent regime.
It would be incredibly tyrannical to do that. I mean, to crack down on everyone. I think you're almost at a point of critical mass where so many people are engaging with it. You risk far more than losing your fiat currency from the point of view of the government if you were to ban Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking about kind of
like a literal revolution. But I hope what it will do in my sort of... And Leo, I just want to talk about in philosophical terms. Do you remember when we talked about a type 1 civilization, a civilization that can harness the power of an entire planet and basically controls its own planet's energy?
Absolutely.
So we're moving to that point. We're on our way. We're in a sort of a 0.7 on that scale.
Yeah.
And a type 1, we talked about an example of a type 1 language is English. A type 1 telephone is the internet. We're using it now. And a type 1 currency doesn't exist, yet it does. It didn't exist 12 years ago, and it was born 12 years ago, and I think that is Bitcoin. And I think it was strange we didn't have it. It took that long even. But it's an inevitable feature of a type 1 civilization to have a currency that looks at the planet holistically. I hate that word, but, looks at the planet for what it is, for God's sake. There's no borders from the International Space Station. We spoke about this right at the beginning. Look at the planet for what it bloody is. Like, it's a rock, okay? There's people on it, okay? No one chose to be born in a certain country. We are where we are. We were born where we are. Our circumstances are what they are. We make the best of our lives. And how is it not the case that the inevitable end is a common currency? For God's sake, that is such a basic, man.
And how has it taken this long?
How has it taken this long?
For the internet to become as complex and liberating as it has become.
The more I look at it, Leo, the more I examine it, I just wonder, how has it taken this long to have a global currency?
And there were plans for global currencies from the top down level, but there's never been global currencies from the bottom up.
Leo, just look at the relations between US and China. That's not going to happen for the next millennia.
No, absolutely not.
This is the thing. Do you know what? That's a beautiful point. It had to come about the way it did. It was never going to come from the top down.
No, because governments...
That's such a great point, man.
Well, governments are just too inefficient, and they're too... ego is so far involved in international relations. Nationalism, and all the regressive ramifications of nationalism. You bring up an interesting point there, the perfect point of China and US, their relations aren't looking good right now. A joint currency, it couldn't be more far-fetched. It's got to come from the bottom up, and the internet is the enabler of that.
The internet is the bottom up. WikiLeaks, all of this shit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like pirate radio, journalism, podcasts.
Yeah.
The freedom of speech, in a weird way. Yeah, the internet did go through this dark age of over-centralization, but as it's become ever more permeable and accessible to the average Joe, it has become a true idea meritocracy. And guess what? In idea meritocracy, the best ideas win.
Absolutely. And this idea is one of the most revolutionary inventions, innovations, whatever you want to call it, for centuries, really.
Some people are saying, Leo, this is, people talking about the internet 3.0. This is the base. This is what will monetize the economy going forward and will determine the value of every digital asset going forward, whether that's a currency or a good or a virtual good or a virtual sword or a virtual shield, whatever the frick it is. Your skin, like you could be green for a day if you wanted, because when we talk about VR and IoT and augmented reality, like you could make believe. It could be make believe, for better for worse. Like we could have a world where virtual and real blend into hopefully a good thing.
I wouldn't be surprised. We were already there with some of Elon Musk's plans, and I think that it's an inevitable aspect. We are all cyborgs in our early stages of being cyborgs right now.
Yeah, I suppose it is an honor and a privilege to witness these early inceptions of thinking about the planet as a planet, as opposed to countries. It's so siloed, it's so unscientific. The scientific method, the scientific approach doesn't work well in silos. We know that.
No,
it works well with collaboration and the exchange of good ideas, and an idea meritocracy where you come up with the best ideas through the process of collaboration. That's how you arrive at the best conclusions and the best inventions, and how technology accelerates. And it's just, I think, a privilege to witness and look back and sit back in awe, and to watch Bitcoin grow into what it has become and what it probably will become.
And there's something, what's beautiful about it is we're not just sitting by the sidelines with the popcorn. It's something that you can be directly involved in. It's a monetary revolution that even on the smallest level, the average Joe can get involved in.
Yes, and a lot of people say, people far more smarter than me say this is going to be bigger, far, 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 far bigger than the internet.
Yeah, absolutely. A kind of fourth revolution beyond the information internet revolution, to the point at which the internet is seen as kind of the wheel that's moving, the apparatus that that precedes this revolution.
Yeah. I mean, blockchain underlying all of it, the truth of who owns what virtual sword, who owns what virtual skin, who owns what virtual wealth, what wealth is owned by whom, what virtual property is owned by whom. It's the tokenomics of the future. It's quite sort of mind-blowing when you start to think about it. You talk about this, Raoul Pal, who I mentioned earlier, and I recommend you look at his channel, Real Vision. It talks about something called the metaverse. Essentially, metadata, if I talk about metadata for a second, is data of data. So almost the assimilation and analytics of existing data, and sort of putting it in pretty charts and making sense of huge, vast swathes of data. And it's a term used in big data. So where you try and make a sense of a table of nonsensical data and draw patterns and insights from it. So a metaverse is something where conceivably you draw something from the real world and create a metaverse, a universe based on the real world to some extent, on your body and your reality as experienced in the real world, and then deriving aspects of that into something called a metaverse, a virtual world, a digital layer to your life that'll become everyday and indisposable. And the tokenomics of that, the tokenization of everything, of your data, being able to tokenize elections, even passing individual bills. Why shouldn't we be able to sit in on the House of Commons virtually and witness anything and everything we want?
Right.
Why can't millions of people sit in on the House of Commons and witness whatever they like and join in and vote on the bills they should or shouldn't be? Why? How isn't that the case? And
why isn't that the case? Yeah. No.
Well, I think blockchain will make it possible. Maybe there are legitimate reasons as to the technological limitations that don't allow that to be yet. But I can see that being the future, where we can be anywhere and everywhere, and we can work from anywhere. I think we all know that's the truth, and to a large extent, this pandemic's accelerated all of these dynamics.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting because I think we're going to have two layers, and they're going to be seamless ultimately between the real world and the virtual digital realm. But there will be, if you look at it sort of objectively, two distinct layers to our lives.
It's already happening. The wheels are fastly in motion. We all have a digital version of ourselves, a data...
digital avatars almost, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sort of avatar versions of the self. And now this is extending to systems of exchange and value, and the The blockchain, which I understand very little of, beyond the surface level, just the tippy top of the iceberg, I can foresee some revolutionary changes to how we vote, how we communicate, how we store and observe value on a global level, and that's going to be beautiful. And I think that it's going to go so far beyond building a better Wall Street to building a better world.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at the base of everything, at the base of it all, will be Bitcoin as the base layer, sort of the foundation of this new virtual metaverse, which will be, it's I think, hopefully an exciting future.
Oh, more than exciting. Absolutely wonderful future.
Yes, and I just wanted to paraphrase something that Michael Saylor said. He talked about sort of the, I don't know if this is something Naval touched on in terms of his...
Didn't mention
potential.
the Michael Saylor, no. But...
No. Well, no, I thought he might be mentioning not so much Michael Saylor, but actually the chance of another cryptocurrency superseding or replacing Bitcoin. Okay. But if he didn't speak to that, I know there was an interview with Michael Saylor, and he was posed this very question. And I just want to paraphrase something he said, because he talked about how Bitcoin's this $1 trillion network and how it's taken. Well, I'll read it. Bitcoin's a $1 trillion digital monetary network. Bitcoin would be the most successful thing you've ever seen in your life, period. For example, it took Microsoft 44 years to be a $1 trillion network. It took Apple 42 years to become a $1 trillion network. It took Amazon 24 years. It took Google 22 years to become a $1 trillion network. It took Bitcoin only 12 years to become a $1 trillion network. And there's no one else. That's it. That's the only $1 trillion networks we've ever had. So what you have is a decentralized digital network which is in essence transforming all of your analog assets of the old world into digital assets. It's global and borderless. It's running everywhere on Earth. You pair this with the increasing rate of the dollar money supply. The dollar money supply, which we talked about earlier, Leo, is multiplied by 3. So we went from an expanding on average dollar money supply increase of 7% a year. This last year, it's been 24%.
Goodness.
So we're looking at basically the increasing circulating dollar supply increasing on an average, like I said earlier, 15% over the next 4 to 8 years. It's it feels like, having said all of that Bitcoin is an inevitability and something that's not going to die easily, and is probably going to be a key feature of tomorrow's economy.
I think that the dynamics of today and the COVID-19 pandemic as well, if anything, will be a catalyst in that outcome.
Yeah, and we were talking about the on average per annum 200% growth per year. That changed in March last year
To 400.
400, correct. So give me an example of anything of this scale of a $1 trillion network that grew at this rate over a time span of only 12 years.
I'm not aware of any company, any financial instrument, any movement that grew to such proportions in such a small space of time.
No, neither can I.
I'm not just saying that for effect. I cannot imagine, I cannot think of any financial movement that got to those heights.
What if I were to tell you we're still early?
Yeah, and that this is just kind of the blink of an eye in terms of the long term. I would believe you, really. I mean, maybe I don't know, maybe I sound naive, but I wouldn't object to that. I can see that very much being a possibility.
Brobears, I hope this. I hope you've enjoyed this. I've enjoyed it. I hope I wasn't too sort of a Bitcoin shill.
I think you've got to wear being a Bitcoin shill, as I wear being a gold shill on my chest. I think give it your all. Give it your all, and if you're wrong, celebrate your incorrectness. But I doubt that you will be.
Brobears, in conclusion, what I want to say is that the Bitcoin white paper by the elusive Satoshi Nakamoto was published on October 31st, 2008. only 6 weeks after the collapse of Lehman Brothers in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. A new hope rising from the ashes of a broken system. Satoshi, whoever he, she, or they are, sparked the most powerful thing known to man, an idea. A decentralized network that saw and understood planet Earth for what it always was, a network of human beings, one people on this rock, borderless information and the exchanging of ideas. In the words of Victor Hugo, there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come. Welcome to the revolution.
What a beautiful and perfect conclusion. Let's finish it there.
Pow!
Pow!
Kapow.